Okay, this is my feedback for question number 11. It refers to text number 5, which is the textbook. Again, a familiar question: what is the potential bias? Whenever you're attempting to detect a bias, you'll need to source and contextualize. You should know this by now. To answer this question, you'll need to remember what we said about how textbooks were written and published. If you don't recognize this process, you'll not be able to detect the bias. I suggest many of you focus on how learning standards shape how the textbook publisher creates the U.S. history textbook. Also, you want to focus on the characterization of historical actors inside the text, as well as the characterization of the nation, in this case the United States. This will help you greatly. Here's a student response that I want to talk about. The potential bias is that the whites want the freedom, and they get that with fighting the Native Americans. Okay, I'm not sure I quite understand this, but it's certainly not clear. But this is the kind of response that I see often. It correctly identifies the subject of the sentence, which means that the writer understood the question, but then adds a predicate, which means the second half of the sentence that makes no sense. It may make sense to the writer, but it doesn't make sense to many readers. Okay, to avoid this kind of problem, you need to go back and reread the sentence and ask yourself, does this response answer the question, and does it make sense? And if we look at those two types of questions, the answer here would be no and no. I also want to point out here, everything is not always about race. So we need to be very careful when we start talking about race. It seems that many of us in the class want to boil everything down to race, and that simply is not going to work. Finally, to successfully respond to this question, you'll need to identify the bias, which means you're going to have to source and contextualize, and then tell why this will be the bias. Many of you are ignoring the fact that you need to tell why.